This year's Ernie Pyle Lifetime Achievement Award winner is a journalist and a queen among scribes. Mary C. Curtis is a bigger-than-life talent who balances a quiet demeanor with an unwavering commitment to delivering truth to her audiences on all platforms, from print to podcasts. The difficulty in reciting Mary's accomplishments is that to do it comprehensively would take far too many hours and too many minutes from the speech she's about to deliver. It's easier if we simply stipulate that she's won multiple dozens of awards at the local, state, and national level. Most recently, the National Headliners Award, first place, of course, because it's Mary C. Curtis. Mary is best known as a columnist for Roll Call and as the host of the Equal Time podcast. She can be heard regularly on NPR affiliate WFAE in Charlotte. And Mary has contributed chapters to several new books about the Trump years and is a senior leader with Public Voices Fellowship Program and the Op-Ed Project based in both DC and Charlotte. Readers of the New York Times, the Charlotte Observer, the Baltimore Sun, the Washington Post, the Associated Press have encountered her byline on articles navigating the intersections of race and politics and culture in America. She's a Harvard Nieman Fellow and a guest lecturer at many of our best colleges and universities. I could go on and on and on and on, but you get it. Mary C. Curtis is a singular journalist, and we're so proud here in the NSNC to call her a member. She's been a member for at least 2 decades now. I have to double check that. Tonight, we're gathered here to present Mary C. Curtis with our most coveted award for her service to journalism. Mary C. Curtis, we're forever inspired by your service to this country as a truth teller, and your mastery of the craft of column writing, your consistency as a chronicler of what it means to be an American in the 20th and 21st centuries, and the elegant way you do it all. You make it look easy, but we know it isn't easy. You are the epitome of what this award is all about. It is with deep, deep appreciation and gratitude as the president of the National Association of Newspaper Columnists that I present to you on behalf of our members this year's Ernie Pyle Lifetime Achievement Award. So please come forward, Ms. Mary C.
Wow.
Woo! Woo!
Well, good evening, fellow enemies of the people. No, really good evening. And know how honored I am to be here with all of you tonight, my tribe of columnists, receiving the Ernie Pyle Lifetime Achievement Award. Now, what, you might think, do I have in common with that great writer? He was born in Indiana, and he made his name and reputation telling the stories of everyday people living in America, and also he traveled embedded, as you might say now, with those fighting in World War II. in combat theaters across the globe. Well, you would be surprised. We both had fathers who never made it past the 8th grade. They had it pretty tough, but they taught us important lessons about life. A life they knew in its harshness and its joy. Ernie Pyle and I both joined Sigma Delta Chi, the journalism organization, when we were both brand spanking new journalists, students of the craft, finding our way. And like all of you here tonight, we both know the power of story. While some may disregard the power of personal experience, our own and that of all those everyday people that we, like Ernie Pyle, write about, we realize that that is not true, that these are important stories. If we don't tell our stories and the stories of the people we lift up, someone else will, and they will get it wrong. We won't be thought of as leaders, and we will never get to any solution to make this world a better place unless all of our voices are included in the conversation. I'm so happy that Jerry Marchineau, Executive Director of the Ernie Pyle Legacy Foundation, is here, and that the foundation works in partnership with NSNC to further the role of journalism in the world today. They have several major programs, and the main event is National Ernie Pyle Day, which you haven't missed because it's August 3rd, which is Ernie's birthday. And it was passed by resolution in the United States and established in 2017, which is very cool. Now, both organizations share a mission of outreach to the generation of writers and journalists who have benefited from the legacy of Ernie Pyle. My story? Well, Janice, the sister many of you have met, who's here, and I share much of the same upbringing and therefore some of the same passions. We grew up in West Baltimore, and that's when I learned the importance of telling our stories. It was a house of readers, and our mother, Evelyn Curtis, took me to the Enoch Pratt Free Library branch at the corner of Pennsylvania and North when I was 3 years old to sign me up for a library card, though actually I signed myself up in a scrawl that filled the page, very unrecognizable. And when the librarian looked a little puzzled, my mom shot back a look that said, "Do you have a problem with that?" That library and the main branch downtown was teacher and refuge to me. My parents' rule was no rule at all when it came to reading, to viewing the movies that the library screened and listening to the records that they made available, with rooms and headphones to make it easy. I listened to opera, which led to my membership in my high school opera appreciation club, mainly for the trips for student productions every year to the Met in New York City, and a lifelong love that I've passed on to my son, including a weakness for Met productions. When he recently told me he caught the latest production of Tosca at the Met with a friend, I was so proud. And for the first time at that library, I saw the movie Nothing But a Man with Ivan Dixon and Abby Lincoln, and I was so moved I cried. That was beautiful. Anything I could consume, I was allowed to consume, which I think is an interesting concept during a time when our country's leaders, some of them, are trying to limit knowledge. I was addicted, and I read of places that I would visit and adventures I would have. And my family would help me make sense of the words or the concepts that I was too young to understand, which was a rule I followed with my own son. I hope he can testify. I'm pretty happy the way everything turned out. So we read the newspapers that came into our home, the Sun and the News American, and that was a problem. Because at that time, anytime I saw someone who looked like me in those pages, it was attached to a story about crime, or welfare, or dysfunction, bad schools, bad neighborhood, bad people. But that did not resemble me, or my mother, or my sisters and brothers, and cousins and neighbors who went to church, who cooked, who gardened and worked hard, and sometimes argued, but always returned to love. We celebrated our successes and mourned our tragedies. One highlight I remember was a birthday party that my mother planned and my father helped realize for me. And I was a fairy princess in a long taffeta dress, and I had a backyard kingdom complete with decorations and a paper mache wishing well, which is not quite the popular image of West Baltimore fun and games that you know. I remember Mrs. Sanders at the black-owned dry cleaners down the street who gave me a penny for every hanger I turned in, which resulted in way too many trips to the corner soda shop for root beer and potato chips. And after I scrubbed those white marble steps, because we had those famous marble steps, with Bon Ami cleanser every Saturday, that was my chore, I had to scrub the steps of the folks in the neighborhood who were older or sick or couldn't do it themselves. And as my mother told me when I protested, she said, when we're at work or school or running errands, they look out those third floor windows and keep a watchful eye on our block, because that's what neighbors do. And on Thanksgiving, I remember serving senior citizens at the church hall before we sat down for our feast. And I realized in West Baltimore that we were changing the world, because I would hide under the dining room table that I have now in my home when my 3 eldest siblings, I'm the youngest of 5, met with their civil rights group. There were young people of all races to plan strategies and marches and moves that would lead to a better future despite all the risks. Yes, there were risks. My brother was arrested twice, my brother Tony, for sit-ins, just to get a hamburger. Now, it was a radical act, I later realized, even for such meetings, integrated meetings, to happen, but they did with the support of my parents, and some of the older folks didn't like it. They would say they wouldn't do that, but my father would say they have the courage to do things even I did not do, and I'm proud of that. Of course, I was really little, so all I knew was the excitement. I later learned of the danger. You know, my parents getting the deed to the house, they didn't want my brother to stay overnight in jail, and they were worried how their joy at being at a church dance turned to worry when they came home and found out he was in jail. And I loved to listen to that and see the signs they would make. And they would sing all of the songs, and I learned the words to all of them. I didn't know what the words meant. Eyes on the prize, we are soldiers in the army, black and white together, we shall not be moved, just like the tree that's planted by the waters. I was like, wow, that was cool. And I didn't understand, but I knew it was important. And I became comfortable with the role of observer, scribe, and commentator. So yes, I was a journalist and a columnist before I knew what it meant. I love that observer's eye. I was taking everything in. And I returned in my writing life to that library that I visited as a 3-year-old, still there years later as a welcoming community gathering place, when all the journalists from around the world parachuted in to cover Freddie Gray's death and the unrest that followed. All they could see was the burning CVS across the street. They didn't see the residents come back and clean up. They didn't see the members of the black sororities and fraternities show up at the funeral. They didn't see the hopes and the dreams and the beautiful, sometimes flawed people with dreams for themselves and for their children, much like the dreams of everybody. Those drop-in scribes had trouble seeing us in all our complex, amazing glory in a city people still dismiss as the wire come to life, or as a, quote, disgusting rat and rodent-infested mess where no human being would want to live, which is how a former president, who will not be named, once said. But in my life and work, many have approached me to say they appreciate a different view when I share it in columns at Harvard or at news meetings in the conference room of the New York Times. They have learned how powerful voice could be. And that is a lesson that Ernie Pyle learned early on. We come from different places, Ernie Pyle and me, but he appreciated his home too. How else could he have written such beautiful passage as, to me, the summer wind in the Midwest is one of the most melancholy things in all life. It comes from so far away and blows so gently and yet so relentlessly. It rustles the leaves and the branches of the maple trees in a sort of symphony of sadness. And it doesn't pass on and leave them still. It just keeps coming, like the infinite flow of Old Man River. You could, and you do, wear out your lifetime on the dusty plains with that wind of futility blowing in your face. And when you are worn out and gone, the wind, still saying nothing, still so gentle and sad and timeless, is still blowing across the prairies and will blow in the faces of the little men who follow you forever. The beauty of home, wherever it is. So when I started using my voice on my high school paper in college, as a Neiman Fellow, and at news outlets from the New York Times to the Post to NPR to Roll Call Today, I learned that people pay attention. The response is sometimes hostile, sometimes not believing, but mostly insightful and moving from folks who are really happy to see other narratives take hold. And it's funny, when John Archibald was here, and thank you, said you don't know what will resonate with people. And you never do, because people are moved by the politics, but you have to believe me, one column that got some of the most vehement reactions came from a piece when I wrote after I moved down south to Charlotte, North Carolina. And it was wondering why so many people in the South dragged their Christmas trees to the curb the day after Christmas, when everybody knows you have to keep it up until the Feast of the Epiphany, so the wise men will know where to go. And I wrote that, and it was insane. I had North versus South, pro and anti-Advent observers, and everybody picking sides. Or there was a woman who just this year came up to me in the mall, and she recognized me and wanted to comment on a column I wrote years ago. And in it, I questioned my Jim's habit of playing the Rolling Stones' Brown Sugar in spin class. And I complained about a song about the abuse of enslaved black girls being used to get its beat, that Jim stopped playing it. And the woman told me how much that meant to her and how she never forgot it. And I blushed because I had forgotten I had even written it. So you just never know what will resonate with people. It's just more proof that representation of all kinds matter. We all matter. Then, but I would say especially now. Now, a few years ago, I became a senior leader with the Op-Ed Project. It's an organization that shares that common mission. And one of our slogans we say, I have it on a t-shirt, is, the story we tell becomes the world we live in. And that message only deepened when I traveled throughout the country and the world, including teaching a group of global leaders meeting in South Africa. And these were folks fighting against tremendous odds. They had overcome hardships, illness, of being poor, of being trafficked. Yet they emerged stronger and more determined. And I've never had more fun drinking and talking and laughing and telling tales all night long than I did with these incredible groups of people. So the Op-Ed Project has another saying that I found especially relevant today, and it is, if you say things of consequence, there may be consequences, but the alternative is to be inconsequential. If you say things of consequence, there may be consequences, but the alternative is to be inconsequential. So I write about the intersection of politics, culture, and race, as Tony said, and all of you know, enough said. Though as columnists, we are living in a time when seemingly everything is political, right? There are divisions over what you watch, what you read, whether you write about family or books or movies or identity, the variety of topics many of you in this room cover. There's something or someone out there who will want to fight you on it. And as a society, we can't agree on science, masks, or even what the truth is. We live at a time when we are at war against enemies abroad and within, when folks don't feel safe at the store, at church, at synagogue or mosque, at schools. And we can't even agree on the best way to meet that fear and overcome it. I'd like to return us back again to Ernie Pyle, who knew about conflict and its horrific, its oh-so-human cost. And this is what he wrote, just a little bit of what he wrote, about an image that we can even see today. He wrote, "A bombed building looks like something you've seen before. It looks as though a hurricane had struck. But the sight of thousands of poor, opportunity-less people lying in weird positions against cold steel, with all their clothes on, hunched up in blankets, light shining in their eyes, breathing fetid air, lying there far underground like rabbits, not fighting, not even angry, just helpless, scourged, weakly waiting for the release of another dawn. That, I tell you, is life without redemption." Now that could define and describe so much carnage in so many places. And I know that's on the minds of many of us right now. But as Ernie Pyle wrote too, sometimes so many can feel immune and that they are above it all, particularly in this country. He was certainly onto something when he wrote, "It's all right to have a good opinion of yourself, but we Americans are so smug with our cockiness, we somehow feel that just because we are Americans, we can whip our weight in wildcats." You know, Ernie knew how Americans could get above themselves sometimes. So it's a time when even the most optimistic among us are feeling uncertain. As I wrote in a recent column, I felt some despair at the slight dimming in the light of the eyes of Congressman James Clyburn, a warrior who has always seen the good and maintained the hope. I've been covering him for years, and this is somebody who met his wife when they were both in jail for sit-ins. And even in that, she got out earlier, and when he got out, she met him with a hamburger, and he was starving, and she broke it in half and gave him half, and he said that was the best hamburger he ever had in his life, and he was in love with her then, right? And he always says things like, "This too shall pass," and the pendulum swings both ways. But even he said, I don't know. But I have to have confidence that he and all of us will keep going. Because I see all of you here, are here, fighting that good fight, each in his or her or their own way. And I respect that. And I respect all of you. And that's why this award from the National Society of Newspaper Columnists means so much to me. Things may be dangerously divided in this country, but as I said earlier, though things may be tribal, this ain't a bad tribe, not by a long shot. And I realize that many of you in this room have overcome much yourselves as personal, professional. You've met and conquered things, sometimes out of your control. But I come here and I get to meet so many great people. I'm only going to be able to name a few. I get to meet John Archibald, someone I've admired. Not only does he write about this, but he does it in Birmingham, Alabama. My hats is off to you. I'm inspired by all of you and what you do in style. I follow Rick Horowitz, whose posts create messages with humor, and sometimes don't you have to laugh to keep from crying. Bill Timaeus always helps me keep the faith. There's Dave Astor. I'm sorry, my friend can't be here tonight. He's here in spirit. He got in touch with me. And I mean, who else can play such clever tricks with books? And can link one of my favorites, which is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, with gun rights. I mean, how does he do this? And then there's our fearless leader, Tony Norman, of course. Thank you for your wonderful introduction. Tony's an inspiration. We swim in some of the same waters, you and I. And we know as columnists of color that sometimes those waters are infested with sharks, and they bite. But you have the courage, Tony, and you have my back. And your amazing talent gives me a high bar to reach for. Thank you. And we have Bonnie. I love Bonnie. Last night she called me a rock star, but I've got to say I'm in awe of her. I'm in awe of her persistence, her perfection. And she won that Legacy Award, but I'm not sure if in the future we might have to call that award the Bonnie. And Suzette, Suzette. So calm, so beautiful, so gifted. So much of your work is devoted to others, to giving us that space to write and to relax and to be at our best. What a generous human being you are. I mentioned my big sister Janice, who she's the storyteller, and she came here from Baltimore for this occasion, and also to represent our big sister Joan, who's here in spirit. She might be having some thoughtful conversations with my namesake, Mary C., the grandmother who died before I was born. I'm so blessed to carry her name and to try to make her proud, and I pay tribute to her with every byline, literally. And there's our eldest brother, Thomas, who is still fighting the good fight. He's a judge, only semi-retired. He will never truly retire. Right now, he's working with police in the state of Maryland on how they interact with folks with developmental and other disabilities. We know that's a problem. And that's very fitting because as a law student and new lawyer on Capitol Hill as a staffer, he worked on disabilities rights legislation. And he's just such the best big brother. He took his goofy little kid sister, me, when I was a kid, to see the theater, to go to the theater, and you all know I have a love of arts and I weave it into my work. And when you know the first thing he took me to see was a Tom Stoppard play. Now, Stoppard is hard for adults to understand, much less a kid, but that was the point. It was challenging, and he treated me always as if I had a brain. And after the play, which I was mesmerized and confused by, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, we went out to dinner at a really nice place with white tablecloths and heavy silver, because he knew I was going to have to learn how to know how to act at places like that, right? And he and Tony and Joan were all involved in the March on Washington. They had courage, and it gives me courage when I have to do things like cover Confederate heritage groups, which I did for a narrative I did that won the Thomas Wolfe Award. And I was going out in the middle of the night with my little notebook at meetings where folks would salute the Confederate flag and end it with a rebel yell, which is kind of scary. And they would say things like, Abraham Lincoln was a war criminal who deserved what he got. And it was pretty challenging, but they had courage. Even when my husband would say things like, now Mary, if I don't hear from you in 2 hours, I'm really gonna call the cops. And I would say to him, when I came back, that wouldn't have done much good because the cops were already there. So many of them were involved in these groups, which may have something to do with why there's a little trouble with black people in police, but I digress. But you know, I want to talk a little bit about my parents too, Thomas and Evelyn Curtis. Their picture sits on the bookcase in my home studio backdrop where I do my TV appearances and things, and I invite Room Raider to say something about that. And I almost brought that black and white picture here with me tonight, because this is a great photo. They look so young and beautiful. My mother's adorable, and my father, honestly, with his handkerchief just so, his creases tight, and his wingtip shoes, he looked like a movie star. He would make Cary Grant jealous. He was insanely handsome. Thank you for the cheekbones, Dad. They're holding up. And they did a lot. My mom went back to college when I was in grade school and became a teacher. And my father, with that 8th grade education, educated himself to be a stationary engineer who could fix most anything. And he would regulate the heating and cooling in schools in Baltimore. And I remember sometimes a winter morning on a Sunday, him getting a call, the heat's not on in this school, come and fix it. And he could. And how much more they could have done. They sacrificed in a world that did not always appreciate their wisdom and their gifts, but they passed everything on with so much love always. They would be here if they could, and they would be proud of me as always. The first time my mother visited me in my office at the Baltimore Sun, she wore a jeweled pin that spelled out mother, really. She did that. And then Janice's husband, Paris, is here. He's my brother. The brother-in-law stuff was dropped a long time ago, this brother. And I want to say it's been a special gift to have a historian in the family, someone who can teach me important lessons. I hear from him that events are cyclical. When I complain about things and how bad they are, he said, everything goes, excuse me,